WIXY1260 Super Radio.
It's the Duker, Larry Morrow, on WIXY1260.
Good afternoon, baby. How you doing, Duker? Sunday with the Duker right now between 3 and 9 o'clock tonight. We're only going to be out at 9 o'clock tonight, folks. 33 degrees curly with the Duker right here. What a day it's going to be. We'll pick them up, put them right back down. Let's get boss right here.
Billy Bass. That's the way it was in 1969. Number 34 was the Sir Douglas Quintet in Mendocino. We're at 10:03 right now. Billy Bass taking you just a little bit closer to number 1. And the year 1970, or the year 1, with Nielsen, number 33.
And it's June 22nd, 2022, a Wednesday night. And we are at the Music Box Supper Club in the Flats in downtown Cleveland. Going to be a great night talking about the wonderful world of WIXY1260. Let's go on in and see what's going on. And here we are. Here's a quick look inside the Music Box Supper Club on the Flats on beautiful Lake Erie in Cleveland. About 6:20. Panel starts at 7 o'clock. Place is starting to fill up. The night has come alive. Oh, Billy Bass is here. Hey. The other star of the show. How you doing, Billy?
All right.
Good. Good to see you.
The guy came up the first time. I remember this. Wherever our table is. You have dinner? Look what I got. So no, I'll read it tonight. Oh, you're going to read it? I'm going to read it. So if you mention a WIXY Thursday, just toss it to me. I think I heard one of the fun toast. Hi there.
We are literally right on Lake Erie.
Something not good. You need to get down here nice and early. I was going to get here nice and early for you guys. Talk to you later. How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Music Box. I'm Mike Miller. I'm the managing partner here. I run a series from September to May called Cleveland Stories, and Cleveland.com and some friends over there approached me about this idea to do a recording. You guys are all have agreed to be on a podcast recording, so no suing afterwards, okay? It's been announced. Guys, we're very proud to be doing this series with Cleveland.com and Troy Smith. You know, I think some of the classic concerts that he's been covering, and then of course some of the classic radio stations are what make Cleveland the rock and roll city, rock and roll headquarters of the world, in my opinion. So I'm going to quickly turn this over to our host tonight, Troy Smith. Troy, take it from here.
Thanks, Mike. That was a short intro. Usually Mike's plugging, you know, every event, his grandkid's birthday, you know, all that stuff. No, Mike's great. First, you know, want to give some shout outs. First, our sponsor, which is the Wonderstruck Music Festival, taking place July 9th and 10th at Lakeland Community College in Kirtland. I just want to let everyone know, there's still a chance before the end of the month. They're doing a promotion. You buy a ticket, you get another ticket for $1. Actually have a great crowd, beautiful day. Want to shout out the WIXY1260 online. People are over here. Really helps promote the event. They're shooting some video, which will make the light of day at some point, so that's really exciting. You need makeup, you know, we didn't let Billy know about the video because he would have been a half hour late getting his makeup done. All right, we're here to talk about WIXY1260. Just a little bit before my time, so I'm going to throw it over to this awesome...
The old timers.
Yeah, we're going to throw it over to these guys, this awesome panel that we have. I'm going to introduce them. First up, veteran of TV, Cleveland radio, a historian, knows pretty much everything about radio history in Cleveland. Michael Chesky, give it up.
Thank you. Very honored to be here.
I want to plug Mike's book because I was reading it today, and it is very detailed about the history of WIXY. That's WIXY1260, Pixies, Six Packs, and Supermen, and you get that pretty much anywhere online, right, Mike? Or here.
Oh yes, we have some here. Yes, it makes a great Christmas gift. You know, not too early. Get Billy and Larry to sign it. It'll be worth a lot of money.
For our next panelist, I think all I have to say is the Duker, Larry Murrow. All right, you run this. Everybody knows this. Radio legend, communicator, teacher, one of WIXY Supermen, and in the Radio and Television Hall of Fame, an inductee. So, thank you so much for doing this.
Delighted.
Thank you. And last up, I'd like to call him the coolest guy in the room. Another radio legend, another former Superman, Billy Bass, people.
Yeah! I'll go to Radio TV Hall. Or, as we used to say, we say Brother Billy.
Brother Billy.
Brother Billy.
So let's talk about WIXY. Mike, I want to start with you.
Sure.
You know, we go back, and to give Mike credit, he brought this idea to me, and it was an amazing idea. Talk about what's so special about WIXY, because, you know, this is before FM radio. This is when WIXY ruled Cleveland.
You know what, the amazing thing about WIXY Radio, when it went on the air in 1965, you know, we had some great stations. We had, I got KYW, WHK, wonderful disc jockeys like Johnny Holiday, who's going to be here next month, and you know, Jerry G and people like that. You got this tiny little station, WDOK AM, that's 5,000 watts. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I know this. Once it goes up the stick, the antenna, it's about 3,500 watts, and it was a directional antenna, meaning I lived in Bedford, which is right on the Summit County line. As you went over the Summit County line, the signal deteriorated. It would boom into Ontario because it was directional. The thing is, it was such a phenomenon with the promotions and the people, and especially the people that came out. The jocks were as big as certainly as the artists they were playing. And you know, keep in mind too, this is right around the time of Beatlemania, the British Invasion, Motown, Beach Sound, all that kind of stuff. It was a harmonic convergence. So we had something really special here. It was, I was very fortunate to talk to Norman Wayne, who was the owner, along with Bob Weiss and Mr. Zingali. And they told me, they said that, you know what, radio stations used to send their jocks in a car up to Cleveland, listen, take down as many notes as they could, then go back. and do exactly what they were doing there. So these were the guys that made the magic, and to say there was magic is not an understatement. They call them Supermen for a reason, really. And the promotions were just outrageous. I mean, to think this, a 5,000 watt radio station forced a 50,000 watt KYW, later WKYC, and then WHK to change formats. You're doing something right. And then in 1966, they got the Beatles. The Beatles. At this brand new radio station, how did the established stations do it? Well, smart people and smart jocks.
I want to ask Larry and Billy, because you guys had gigs before going to WIXY. What was, how tough, or what was the radio business like back then?
Well, Top 40 had just been introduced for the most part. And the format along that time was called More Music, More Often. And we were playing 20 songs an hour. And Norm Wayne even found a way. Now the songs in those days by the Beach Boys, the Beatles and things, they were 2.5 minutes long. Norm Wayne said, I think we're playing 17 songs an hour, maybe we can play 18. So we'd take the song in, put it on the turntable, speed it up a little bit. So we could get one more song.
That's a trade secret. Larry, we didn't really do that, okay?
Yeah. I mean, but to be on stage, of course, with Mike and Billy, I have this famous Billy Bass story.
Just one?
So now we had the early part of the basketball team was called the Larry Morrow WIXY All-Stars, and we played all the high schools, and we never lost a game because on the team was Paul Warfield. And Paul would bring with him other stars that played with the Miami Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns. Well, Billy had been at the station for maybe a year. Billy was our best jock. There was no doubt about it. He played football better, baseball better, and basketball really better. So now we're going out to Lily White Lakewood. And we're wondering at that time how Billy's going to do in Lakewood. So I decided to introduce Mike Ranieri, Lou King Kirby, Chuck Knapp, the Wild Child, and save Billy for the end. Now the place is packed. The high school is absolutely packed with kids and everybody, teachers and stuff. So now I saved the ending and I said, and now ladies and gentlemen, the newest addition to WIXY1260, Billy Bass. They bring the house down. They literally bring the house down. And then Billy, to make things worse, or even better, goes out and scores 45 points. And embarrasses all the teachers, embarrasses everybody. I wanted to tell that story to my man, Brother Billy.
So, let me tell you how this happened, though. So, Larry and Luke and Kirby and the child, they used to get promoted. You remember the WIXY Super 60 survey? Yeah. You guys remember that? Well, their pictures were on it all the time. My picture was never on. So I go to Norman Wayne, I said, Norman, what's the deal? How come my picture's not on there? He said, well, are you crazy? You're black. And I said, Norman, you can't say that. I mean, that's ridiculous. He said, Billy, you're black. I want you to know you're black. Now, if the audience has no idea you're black, but if you let them know that you're black, it's going to be terrible. So after Larry does this unbelievable introduction in Lakewood and the place goes nuts, now all of a sudden Norman thinks, okay, well maybe we could. So he puts my picture on the WIXY Super 60 survey, and I can't tell you how horrible that was. And Norman said to me,
You know what though?
I told you so.
Let me add this though. I went to interview Norman Wayne for the book. And he had this room that was like an office where he was like, and he was telling us, and I remember he had his hands, and he told us that story. And he said he never got down the embarrassment of saying that to you. He said that he regretted saying that, but he loved every one of the jocks, including you.
Let me say this, I never took it that way. He was protecting me. And I understood that the moment that the word got out. Norman was my guy. I love Norman.
Mike early talked about the signal was awful.
Oh yeah.
At night, from 7 to midnight, you took your little transistor radios, put them under your pillow at night, and you could listen. But I remember one night, I always took care of the uniforms. When the basketball game was over, I would take the uniforms, go get them clean, and get ready for the next game. I brought some of the players back. Billy may have been with us, I'm not sure. We're sitting in my car in front of WIXY1260 at 40th and Euclid and couldn't hear the radio station. It's 10 o'clock at night and couldn't hear the radio station. That's how bad it was.
Well, that's the amazing thing when you read the book and you look at the history, that the signal wasn't as strong as the stations you guys were competing with, yet still worked your way to number one.
Think about the ratings here now. This is something Norman Wayne told me, and he thought he said this to you, Larry, but it might have also been to you, Billy. You probably got the same lecture. One day he gets the ratings. He said, "What is going on here?" Now, mind you, WIXY had 20 competitors, AM and FM. So he thought it was you, but he called and he says, "Larry, you're losing audience. What's going on here? Listen, you better get in shape or you're losing audience." He said, "But I'm number one." He said, "You only got 49% of the audience." And I think he gave that to every job, because he mentioned you at one point.
What he did with me, I went in after the Lakewood situation, I went and asked for a raise.
Good move.
Unfortunately, I only had a 32 share, but 32 share, give me a break. I said, "Norman, I got a 32 share. People like me, I need a raise." He says, "Nobody's listening to you." 32, what's that? That's nothing. Nobody's listening to you. That's every third person listening to the radio is listening to me, but I got no raise.
What was really interesting about that time is that I was on from 10 until 3. That's when all the housewives listened. And they were all home then. They stayed home and took care of their kids. Nobody was working. And to think of a couple of promotions, one was called Larry What's in the Box. I would describe what the box looked like. You had to guess what it was and what was in it. And the other one was called Wonder What's Cooking, sponsored by Wonder Bread. I'd give out a little ingredient, and then the ladies would call in and try to guess what it was. When you think of those promotions, people would laugh at you today. But now this is a wonderful story, talking about Norm Wayne. So now the ratings they really jump up from 10 till 3. And I had jumped up to a 50 rating. Wow. And I remember being so proud of that 50 rating, still making $7,000 a year. Yeah. Norm said, "Come on, Larry." So now the 50 rating, Norm Wayne took it on a weekend, and the 50 jumps up to an 80. So I have an 80 share rating at the time, to my knowledge, the largest rating ever given in the city. Now I slip back to a 50. I get a note from Norm Wayne saying, "Dear Duker, we will no longer put up with this kind of slippage." That's not like Norm.
That's Norm.
Well, the thing too is, we go back a little bit. You were number one or one of the top DJs in the market before you even came to WIXY, right? You were in Windsor.
Well, that's a really interesting story. Many of you may or may not remember, but my nickname, the Duker, came from the fact that I worked at Duke Windsor in CKLW. And CK, because it was a powerful station, came right across the lake. So when Norm Wayne called me, he said, "I want you to come to this brand new radio station called WIXY1260. They'd only been on the air, I think, for about 6 months. And I said, "I have not heard of you." He said, "Well, we're brand new, we're top 40. And he says, "We have a guy by the name of Jack Armstrong from 7 to Midnight, and we're going to fire him. And we'd like to have you come and be our new 7 to Midnight guy." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." I needed a job because I had been fired from CK. And so then he called me back a week later and he said, "We decided to keep Jack, so you can't come." And I thought, you know what? I don't want to work in Cleveland anyway. Because I worked in the 5th largest market, which was Detroit, Windsor. You don't go from Detroit, Windsor, at 5th market, to the 8th market. So I thought, look, I'm going to New York, Chicago, or LA. I'm going to skip Cleveland. So then he gives me a call and he said, "We decided to keep him, but our midday guy is going to move on. Would you like to do 10 to 3? And I said, yes. And when I drove down 77 and saw all those terrible pipes down 77 and the steel factories, I said, "I'm not staying here. I'm going to go on, but I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to get out of here as soon as I can." And then I fell in love with Cleveland and decided to stay. 10-3, and it was maybe, surely the best move I ever made in my life to stay there.
Let me piggyback on that story. So here I am at WHK-FM, which was the precursor to WMMS, playing Inagata-Davida. And these guys are on WIXY, the biggest radio station in my mind in the world.
Yeah.
Nothing was that big. And here was Larry Morrow from CKLW. And then we had Chuck Dunaway from WABC New York. And we had Chuck Knapp from WLS Chicago. And we had John, what's his name?
John Marsh?
No, the guy you were just talking about. Can't think of his name. You know, the fast-talking DJ.
Jack Armstrong.
Jack. He was.
Jack Armstrong.
So I get this call from Norman Wayne that says, we want you at WIXY. And I'm thinking, are you crazy? Because I had no radio, nothing about me was in radio. I had no knowledge of it whatsoever. I knew how to play underground records because the DJ didn't do anything but play the records. But they didn't have to perform like these guys had to perform. So every night I was scared to death. I mean, I'm thinking, oh my God, CKLW, he must have, to come to WIXY, the best radio station, they must be attracting the best talent in the world, you know, from New York, from Chicago, from Detroit. And then I realized they all got fired from those stations. So it was okay, I can do this. I'll give it a shot.
You know, we're going on, because I want to talk about that. When I came to WIXY, it was September of 1966. It was a really cold day. And I came in, it was one night, and Norm Wayne brought me into the radio station to show me the station. And he said, we're going to hire some other guys. Now, in those days, if a radio station was purchased by another company, all the DJs were fired, and they would bring on all new DJs. So that's what happened at CK. So I was fired, so I come here. So he introduces me to Lou King Kirby. Lou had been from Texas at a 50,000 watt station. 50,000 is the greatest, is the biggest, what am I saying? Anyway, yeah. And that's as big as you get. So he had been at a 50,000 watt station in Texas. I came up from a 50,000 watt station in Detroit, Windsor. So then I get introduced to the Wild Child, who had been at a 50,000 watt station in Chicago. So then here we are, the three of us at that time, all retreads. Norm Wayne said, I'm going to make you guys stars. We thought we were stars. But Norm Wayne didn't believe that. But it was good.
I just want to point out something about promotions. Now, keep in mind this was a different time, okay, in the 1960s, okay? It was a transition, granted, you know, but this is far from, you know, the political correctness we had today. There were a couple of promotions that come on. Billy, I think you hosted one on Public Square. Was it the Hot Pants contest? It shut down Public Square. But the all-time great one, along with one, because that challenged it. There was a woman in New York who would get off the subway station on Wall Street. She was very amply endowed, and she drew a crowd every day. As she got off the subway, there'd be huge applause. So Norm Wayne says, we can do better than that. So he said, we're gonna have this contest, and it was on 9th and Euclid, and Francine Gottfried was the name of this woman. And sure enough, she wins it. The crowd shuts down the city. So the jocks didn't have a stage. They were standing on top of a truck. And the cops come up and they said, who's in charge? And the cops said, Norman Wayne. So they went up to Wayne, they said, do you have a permit for this? He said, how do you get a permit for a riot? So they said, well, get out of here, quick. But then it turns out, when we were interviewing Norm, he showed us these letters. They were trying to get them actually in Playboy. You know, the winners of this contest. So that's some prize, huh? You guys are something with these promotions.
I was not a fan of those kind of things. And then Norm Wayne said, following that, he says, Duker, guess what we're going to do? We're going to have a miniskirt contest, and we're going to have it at Public Square. And he said, I said, Norm, I said, I'm not really into that. Come on, man. He said, we'll be on a teeny little stage, because I was worried that if it was going to be a big stage, you can see all the little 15 and 16-year-olds. And so So I said, okay, I'll MC it, and of course, the rest of us are all there. I get down there, and it's a 12-foot stage. Now, just to give you some idea, the Francine thing was the kickoff of all this, but we had 100,000 kids there at Public Square. And all the young, and all, of course, 99% of them are all young boys looking like this. Wow, this is great. So,
how do you know that, Larry? Were you out there?
oh, those were, but there was nothing like WIXY1260 at the time, and to be honest with you, we didn't know it. You know, we didn't know that WIXY had turned out to be a juggernaut, that it not only was big ratings in Cleveland, but we had at one time the top 10, one of the top 10 stations in America, WIXY1260. And again, none of us knew it. But I have to tell this one story. Billy talked about we couldn't make any money. Nobody made money working at WIXY, other than the 25 bucks we made on doing record hops. So I remember the Cleveland Press had a contest, the best disc jockey contest. I win the contest. And so now I'm making $9,000 a year. And I go into Norm Wayne, and I take the Cleveland Press article, which was on the front page of the press, and I take it into Norm, and I said, Norm, I'd like a raise. He said, for what? I said, Norm, I came here at $7,000 a year. I'm up to $9,000, and I'd like to make more. What do you want? I said, I want $20,000. He said, you're out of your mind. And I said, Norm, I said, okay, just let it be. So he says, no, let me call my wife, Nina. He calls Nina, and he said, the Duker is sitting here, and he wants a raise. And Nina says, well, how much does he want? Said he wants $20,000. So then Norm says, Nina wants to talk to you. He puts Nina on, and Nina says, don't you dare leave that radio station without $20,000.
We love Nina.
Yeah, so now I go into Joe Zingali, who's the toughest of all of them. And I said, Joe, I said, Norm sent me in to talk to you. He said, you want $20,000? I said, yes. He said, how much money did you make last year? I said, $9,000. No. How much money did you make doing all those commercials? You were on national television doing B.F. Goodrich for the Super Bowl. How much did you make? I said, that's unfair. Anyway, I told him the number. It was a big number. And he said, and you want $20,000 from me? Get out of here. They finally, the three of them agreed, gave me $19,999. Give me the tour.
Billy, as we're talking promotions, and you've got some on this paper here. I'm curious now.
Do you guys remember Jim LaBarber?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Well, I called him up. I told him what we were doing. I said, Jim, come on up. And he couldn't make it, but he sent this letter. So may I read it? WIXY's first Christmas parade had Tim Conway as the Grand Marshal. You guys remember that? And it was on Euclid Avenue with several recording stars. The paper said 100,000 people turned out for the second WIXY Appreciation Day at Geauga Lake. Gene Pitney was our headliner, and the paper said, get ready, 120,000 people showed up for the parade. It was absolutely unbelievable. He was standing on stage looking at the sea of people. He was one of the WIXY, he was the first teacher at the WIXY School of Broadcasting. He says, he doesn't forget that one billboard we all had with the naked lady. You remember that? He said it got so many complaints it stopped traffic. So many people have asked me about WIXY, why it was so special, and how did it knock out the big 50,000 watt radio stations? And the answer is Norman Wayne.
Yeah, that was a good idea.
I want to say, to take it back a little, Billy talked about being, when you joined WIXY and seeing these bigger names, the guys came from bigger stations. But, I read both of the books, Michael Chesky book and Larry's book, and you both have these interesting comments on Billy. Mike, you talk about him, you mentioned the book, him bringing an FM mentality to AM radio. And then, Larry, you have this line, if I get it right here, that Billy on the radio he wasn't trying to win the audience or record an audience. He was like a hunter trying to catch his prey. And I thought, that's pretty awesome. So,
well, you know, we had, to be honest with you, we had a lot of great voices. You know, Mike, and I want to get back to the Billy story because, to be honest with you, the best voice on the station was Billy. There was no doubt about it. Billy had the best voice.
Thank you, Larry.
But Mike Ranieri was the guy who got all of us really moving in the morning. I would get there at 10 o'clock, about 10 to 10 every morning, and Mike Ranieri, we'd do a changeover. And one day I showed up, I used to love to dress up. So on the opening day of spring, I dressed up in it's going to sound awful, but I thought it was cool. Had a pair of white shoes, green socks, a green pair of pants, white shirt, green and white tie, and a green and white seersucker coat. Mike Ranieri, right at 10 o'clock, says, "What do you dress like?" And I explained what I was dressed like. And he said, "You look like the president of a lizard factory." and then another day, and we did something every day. Another day, I show up at 10, and I had a beautiful leather coat on. And he said, "Where'd you get that coat?" And I said, "I just bought it." And he said, "My father had that coat on the seat of his car about 20 minutes ago." He said, "It looks like you just stole it." I won't get into it, but we used to play tricks on each other. And the one guy who stood out from everyone was really the wild child. And one day, and I won't go into all the details because it's not a good ending, but we celebrated Christmas, and all the gifts were laid out under a tree at the radio station. And the wild child would come in at night, work from 7 to midnight. Well, the next day, everybody just started opening gifts. And if you got a pair of socks, one of the socks was missing. If you got something else, half of that was gone. So Norm Wayne calls and he said, "Something's wrong." He says, "I think the wild child stole all those stoles." He opened all the gifts, took something out of each one of them, and then put it back. So Norm said, "Would you do me a favor?" I just lived a couple of miles from the station, so I drove down. I walked in the station, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I walked into that little kitchen that we had, and the sink was ripped off of the wall. And then, and I brought my wife with me at the time, and then she said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know." All the windows had been broken. All the windows had been broken. The place was an absolute mess. The turntables were turned upside down. And I walked in to see the wild child, and he's standing there doing his show with the headphones on and not a stitch of clothing. That was the wild child. And I remember calling Norm Wynn, and I said, "Norm," I said, "something's wrong." And I said, "I didn't find any extra pair of socks, but this place looks like a hurricane went through it." So now Norm calls the program director, George Brewer, and he says, "I want you to fire him on the air. Fire him right now." So what George didn't realize is that Wild Child put him on the air. So George said, "Wild Child, as soon as you finish, take your headphones off, leave them there, and never come back again. You're done." Well, sadly enough, all those kids are listening. 5,000 teenagers show up the next day at 40th and Euclid demanding to have the Wild Child back, and it turned out to be a front page story, and hired him back. But he was something. I won't go into all the other stories because we'd be here all night, but he was a wild guy.
I just want to mention that I tracked down the Wild Child.
Oh, did you?
And he was living in Ketchikan, Alaska. You can't get there by road. There's no road. You have to fly in or take a boat. So his son told me he lived above a bar. So I called the bar, which had the phone, and I said, "Well, I want to leave a message for Dick Kemp." Yeah, the guy said, "Yeah, we get these all the time. Listen, give me your number. He'll call you back if he thinks it's important. One more thing, he won't call you back." I said, "All right, well, at least leave the number." But he lived up to his name, obviously. Sure.
I wanted to ask you guys about the Beatles concert, because that seemed like the moment where WIXY became the station, or at least sort of stands out. Were you there already, Larry?
Well, sadly enough, no.
Okay.
What happened was when he hired me to start, I believe it was September 23rd of 1966. The Beatles showed up, 5 days before. So of all the acts that I've met through my entire career, and probably all of them, never had the chance to meet the Beatles, and sadly enough, and I never let Norm Wayne forget it. So,
in our audience right now is Tom Kehoe, and he has a ticket to the Beatles concert from
Hang on to
Cindy
that.
has it? Okay.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Oh my!
The Beatles from Municipal Stadium.
And Mike, that was
How much was that? $5.50 to see the Beatles. Can you believe it?
You know, I just want to mention that Norm Wayne and Zingali and Weiss, when they were at WHK, they brought the Beatles to Cleveland. But then when they were able to get around everybody else through savvy promotions, WIXY lands the Beatles. 80,000 seats, the Beatles get all the money from the gate. And then they were going to get the Norm Wayne and the station was going to get, besides publicity, was going to get concessions. Then that article comes out with John Lennon saying, the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. The Catholic Church comes out and says no good Catholic would go to that concert. The ticket sales come to an absolute halt. They're going to Pittsburgh, Toledo, any place that did not have a Beatles show. So finally, they said, we're going to lose our shirts. We're only 6 months old. So Norm went to New York, went to the Hotel Pierre. The Beatles are there with Brian Epstein. And he said, look, can we lower this, lower the quota here? We can't fill 80,000 seats. He said, I know, but let's go. So they go in the back room. The Beatles are playing Monopoly, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. They said, guys, this is Norm Wayne. Can he lower the demand? Yeah, sure, we don't care. So they were able to still sell 20,000 tickets. Norm met the Beatles probably half a dozen times. He never had his picture taken with them. And his son David, who's a well-known producer, said, Dad, what got into your head? He said, I always thought they were coming back the next year. And they never did. So, but I mean, still, they were, this was an amazing time. They sold 20,000 seats, but in Cleveland Stadium, that's not a whole lot.
And Billy, you were at WHK when WIXY got the Beatles. Was that sort of a signal to you that WIXY had become the station?
No, I knew WIXY was the station because I was a listener. I loved the music. Me at WMMS made no sense whatsoever to leave WMMS where I could do whatever I wanted to do to come to work at WIXY where I had to follow a format. But I want to, now that I know this is going to be a podcast, I mentioned Norman Wayne's name, but the name I really want to mention is Jane Scott. Jane Scott wrote What's Happening. If you guys ever read What's Happening, I'm sure you did. Well, Jane Scott came down to the music rattle before I just went to WMMS. And we were What's Happening. That little record store across the street from Cleveland State University was selling all the underground music. So Jane comes into the record store and says, I've been hearing about you. What's going on here? Well, a lot was going on here. Joe Walsh was in the back room playing on his guitar. Jimmy Fox was in the back room. Glenn Schwartz was in the back room. A lot was happening there. So Jane Scott said, I think I'm going to make a mention of this in the newspaper. What's your name? I said, my name is William Bass. She said, William Bass? Nah, you're Billy Bass from now on. and I became Billy Bass. And Jane wrote about Billy Bass. And I think that's the only reason why Norman Wayne took any interest in me, because I had no business being on the air with these unbelievable jocks, literally the best in the world, were right here at WIXY1260, and I was scared to death. Fortunately, one of the jocks was Chuck Knapp from WLS Chicago, another one of the big stations. And Chuck Knapp saw that I had no business being on WIXY. I can't imagine. What did you guys think when I came to WIXY? Because you guys were so important. What did you think about that?
About what?
About this guy coming to work on WIXY that had no top 40 experience.
Well, you know what? The first thought was, who's Billy Bass? Who's Billy Bass? No, you know what? I don't think we gave much thought to it. I don't think we gave much thought. At those days they weren't coming and going either. We'd all been there for a long period of time, but when Billy got on air, of course, it was the first time that I had worked with anyone that was African American, and then that was Billy. But as I mentioned earlier, he had a better voice than all of us. And I used to get on air, and I would come out and say, "Hey, I'm the Duke or Larry Morrow." Da 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 da. Here's Billy. Hey, I'm Billy Bass. I'm Billy Bass. And you all know, please forgive me, men are different than women. But I thought that Billy had 3 testicles. I'm Billy Bass. I'm Billy Bass.
Well, I think it was Jane Scott that brought the interest to Norman Wayne, and I got a chance to work with these guys. But every night that I opened the mic, I was scared to death. I knew there was no way I could match these dudes. And Chuck Knapp, God bless him, I wish he was here tonight. But Chuck Knapp took me under his wing and he said, listen, I'm going to show you how to do this. And he actually spent time with me. He was on from 10 to 2 and I was the all-night guy. And Chuck would spend the whole night with me teaching me how to run the board. He would say, just be yourself, but you got to learn how to run the board. You don't know how to run the board. And he kept showing me, you know, the things I needed to do. So I want to say that I would never have had this opportunity to work on a radio station were it not for my friend, Jane Scott.
Yeah, hallelujah. You know what, an interesting point too, is that some of the sponsors became stars. Rick Case, Larry Robinson, Larry J.B. Robinson. I mean, these guys couldn't walk down the street because they were on WIXY, and you were promoting them. So, and I mean, Larry Robinson became, you know, like this, he was the Diamond Man, absolutely, the Schofield building. And I mean, you know, he became a star just because he was on WIXY, but you know, you guys built that station into, look what it was.
And I wanted to ask Larry, I wanted to ask you, and Mike, you might know the answer to this too, who and how did they come up with the Superman name for you guys?
Oh, I don't know. All I know is that one day we're WIXY guys, and now the next day we're WIXY Supermen. But I want to reflect back to Larry Robinson. Larry Robinson's father had just died, and it was just called at that time Robinson's Jewelers. So this guy walks into the studio to do commercials, and I said, "And you are whom?" He said, "I'm Larry Robinson." And I said, "Well, I'm Larry Morrow," and he said, "I'd like to have you introduce me." And I said, "What do you want to be known as?" He said, "The Diamond Man." Remember? So I said, "Well, here's Larry Robinson, the Diamond Man." And then I did his commercials for the next 10 years, I think. This is an interesting story. Now I'm going to reflect back on probably Avery Friedman's with me. Avery, how many years ago? 10? 8? 8 or 10 years ago. I'm doing a show coast to coast from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And there's a guy, and by the way, Larry Robinson had preceded me, obviously, in death. Larry died maybe 10 years ago. And I never knew that there was, that my voice sounded like his. I didn't know that. All I knew is that we were both Larrys and we both had low voices. Well, so now this guy is standing outside the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the window there above the studio. And I looked at Avery and I said, "Avery, this guy has been staring at me for 2 hours. Let's go find out what's wrong." So I opened the door and I called the guy in and I said, "You've been looking at me for 2 hours. Is there something wrong?" He said, "I thought you died." And I said, "I don't understand." He said, "Aren't you Larry Morrow?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I thought you were Larry Robinson." Because, and now that didn't only happen once. About a month later, I went in to get a cup of coffee at Bob Evans. I get the cup of coffee and the guy looks at me and he said, "I don't get it." I said, "What?" He said, "You died like 6 months ago." And I said, "No, I'm Larry Morrow." And he said, "Oh." So now the best one is, about a month ago, I walk into the bank. The guy says to me, "I'm so glad you're here." He said, "I loved your jewelry store." So I'm good, and I decided to play along with it. So he said, "I loved your jewelry store." I said, "Would you have any of my jewelry?" And he said, "Not really, but my wife does." And we really did like your jewelry store. And I said, "Well, that's great." And so then he was going to give me a credit card for something. So I said, "And put my name on the credit card." So he started to write Larry Robinson, and I said, "No, here's my real name." And I handed him the name. He said, "Larry Morrow, who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Larry Morrow, not Larry Robinson." And then, of course, he's on his knees apologizing. "Oh, I listen to you on the radio all the time." "Oh, yeah."
I'm curious for you guys, being younger, what it was like to be on the airwaves at the time you were in the 60s because of everything that was going on. I think right when you came to Cleveland, it was during the Up riots.
They'd only been on the air 6 months when I came.
And you had this story, I think it was 69, where you actually went to Vietnam. I'd love for you to tell that story because that, it's a huge moment for you.
I had been in the Marine Corps, and our program director was Bill Sherrard. You know him well, Billy. And so Bill Sherrard and the promotion director, Linda Scott, called me in their office and said, and it's the height of the Vietnam War, 1969. And they said, you were in the Marine Corps? And I said, yes. And they said, how would you like to go to Vietnam? And at that time, the Vietnam War was just starting to be played out on national television, and it wasn't very cute. It was awful. And so I said, no, I don't want to go. And I said, why would anybody want to go to Vietnam? And they said, well, we have 220 Clevelanders there, and we thought it would be a great idea if we sent you over there to interview all of them, bring the interviews home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we'll play them on the radio. And I said, you'll never get permission. So we get turned down from everybody. Our congressman tried, everyone that we could think of in Cleveland that had any power at all, including all of the politicians, said no, you can't go to Vietnam. So one day, I get a call from the Pentagon, and it was Colonel Melton, and he said, is this Lawrence Morrow? And I said, I don't know who you are, but I haven't been called Lawrence since I was baptized. And he said, your request to go to Vietnam is somehow ended up on my desk. And we're going to send you to Vietnam to interview all the Clevelanders. And when you're there, because President Nixon would like to know how all the servicemen, both officers and enlisted men and women, how they feel about the war. So he said, so we're going to send you to Vietnam, and then you'll make your report after you interview your people all over Vietnam, make the report back to us, and then we'll give it to the president, and that'll help him make a decision. So I get my papers in the mail, and they're addressed to now. I was a corporal in the Marine Corps, meaning I was on the lowest level. You go private, and then PFC, private first class, then corporal. But being an officer is this far up. It's 25 years and on and on and on. So I get the mail, and it's addressed to Colonel Lawrence D. Morrow. How many people in the service here? Any people in the service? Okay. So being a colonel is a big deal. It's like being the president of the United States. So I called the Pentagon back, and I said, you've made a terrible mistake. You've addressed me with all my papers addressed to Colonel Lawrence D. Morrow. He said, well, when you get to Saigon, we'll explain. When they get to Saigon, he said, because you're an officer, because you're going to be going all over Vietnam, if you get captured, if you're an officer, they'll negotiate to get you back. But if you're an enlisted man, they'll just shoot and kill you. I said, so it was so cool for me to see first lieutenants, second lieutenants, and captains saluting me. And I thought, that was so cool.
Well, you had with some of those guys back in Cleveland, didn't you?
Yes. As a matter of fact, this guy did me the greatest favor. I interviewed 65, I interviewed more, but only 65 people gave me interviews. Some of them just said no thanks. And so a couple of years ago, Channel 5 did a story in the 50th anniversary of Vietnam. And I did not have any of those cassettes. None. And those cassettes, by the way, when I got back, were sent to all the families of the men and women that I had interviewed for Christmas and Thanksgiving. By far, the best promotion that I believe this town has ever done, ever. You can imagine. And it took WIXY, we didn't need to go with bigger rating, but it took us to another step. And the guy who did the story for the Cleveland Press, I know the plane dealer, Bill Hickey. I remember Bill Hickey taking me to lunch, and he said, I've always hated WIXY1260. I thought those dumb little promotions you did with the bosoms and the contest with the skirt, I thought they were terrible. This, I think, is probably the best promotion anyone has ever done in this town. So now it's the opening of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I told my wife that I think we should go, because there were some that I had interviewed that didn't make it back. So now I go to the Vietnam Memorial. It's called the Veterans Vietnam Memorial. And I was able to touch the names of 2 or 3 of the men and women who didn't make it back. So that, and I often get asked, of all the 40 years that you spent in Cleveland, you know, what is the one thing that you remember the most? And I always single out my trip to Vietnam. Yeah, it's special.
I want to, you know, we're going to open this up. Amazing story. And when I read that, it really touched me, and I wanted you to be able to tell that. For everybody, we're going to open this up to questions soon, because I'm sure we have some really great questions with this audience. Mike, I wanted you to put a stamp on this because, you know, you touched on it earlier, but WIXY was the station that changed the game. And Billy, you can talk about this too, because you went back to WMMS, and obviously that took off. But how did WIXY really set the stage for radio moving forward?
You know what, because the name keeps coming from both of these guys, you know, and it's Norm Wayne and the management there, and great promotions. And you know what, there was great management there. You know, my wife Janice and I went out to interview Marge Bush. Marge Bush did not look like a music director, not the kind that you would see now. I mean, she was just like almost, I hate to sound almost sexist, almost like a housewife maybe, you know, but she was very businesslike. She knew what she wanted, and she had a great ear for music. And there were some other great people too, Eric Stevens, people like that. But you had just great people on and off the air. And plus you had the music that was happening. The city was sort of like in a transition, but this is the thing that brought us all together. You know, I did want to bring up one point, that you worked with, obviously, King Kirby, Lou Kirby, as did you, Larry. Marge Bush, Jan and I went out to visit Marge Bush. He said, I got a secret to tell you. At the end of the show, remember what Lou King Kirby used to say, "Are you ready, my surf?" And this girl would say, "I'm ready, my king." That was a voice actress. She was 14. Oh. They didn't let Larry know that, you know. But really, I mean, what a scandal that would have been. You know, he's taking a 14. But really, quite honestly, it was just a harmonic convergence. Everything just lined up with the greatest personalities, greatest music, and a great audience that needed something like this. That's what you guys brought it all together. So both of these guys, they were Supermen, really.
Well, you mentioned Jan, and there she is open. So Jan, stand up and show everybody your T-shirt.
Billy Bass, rub that out. There you go. And Daffy Dan on the back.
Daffy Dan is in the house. Daffy Dan, stand up.
Daffy Dan, stand up. Come on.
By the way, that Billy Bass Run to Help actually raised over $100,000 for the Cleveland chapter of the American Red Cross.
Well, wait a minute, you're not telling us that was $5 at a time, too.
$5 at a time, but
amazing.
It was also 9 years. Yeah, or was it 8? I can't remember. It was a lot.
You know, I want to single one person out who is here tonight. With the 40 years that I spent on the air, there was a young man who worked with me at WIXY1260. And he was just a young kid, liked to hang around a radio station, 13, 14, 15 years old. And when I left WIXY1260, he said, "Would you sign a little picture of yourself?" So I'm going back to I left WIXY in 1972, so it was right around that time. I signed that picture and signed a nice message to him. And he later left WIXY. He became a writer for a magazine, and then came over to 3WE, became my producer of the morning show over there. And then he went on to be a big star at one of the TV stations here. His name is Jim Stunnick, and he's here with me now. Jimmy, just raise your hand. One of my dearest friends.
You know, if I could just bring one story. Norm Wayne had another station. It was WIXY, WIXZ in McKeesport. Yeah. And it was a tiny little station. And maybe, I don't know, you guys might he told me that if somebody got out of line in Cleveland, they got sentenced to WIXY, out in McKeesport. But they had a 17-year-old morning guy. He was 17 years old. So Norm Wayne says he's at one of these NAB conventions, broadcasters conventions, and the seas part. This big guy comes walking over. He says, "Mr. Wayne, I want to thank you for giving me my start in radio." He says, "Great, who are you?" He says, "Well, I was Jeff Christie, now my name's Rush Limbaugh." Okay, well, but he started out.
Norman is not happy about that.
No, not at all. He was on Nixon's enemies list. He said it was the proudest moment of his life.
I want to get to the questions for if you have a question, we have some mic wranglers here. Raise your hand and we'll get to you. All right, we're going to go back here.
Tell us about the Chicken Man promotion.
Larry, you tell him.
Well, when I never really understood Chicken Man, but I will tell you that it was one of the most popular things that we ever did. You know, Chicken Man, he's everywhere, he's everywhere. And it became maybe one of the best promotions we ever did. And then one day, Chicken Man just disappeared. But the good news was, the voice for Chicken Man happened to be Jim Runyon. Remember at the end of it, they would tell the story about Chicken Man, and at the end of it, to sum it up, he would go, well. And I thought, where do you get a voice like that? Like Billy, you have to have 3 testicles. So, but yeah, Chicken Man became a very, very important part of it.
They ran it once an hour. Yeah.
But I want to tell, before you get another question, I don't want to go home without telling the story about how wild the Wild Child was.
How wild was he?
I'm trying to think. I just had the story in mind, and then the Chicken Man got me off of my story.
It's the drugs, Larry.
I'll think about it. Go ahead, Billy.
All right, we'll take the question and see if it pops back up. Okay, right here.
Well.
Well, look who's here.
Carl, look at that.
Hey, Carl. Carl Mundy, ladies and gentlemen. Carl Mundy.
You know, payola was a big deal back to the radio. No, I'm just kidding. This is a 2-part question. The first one goes back to the Beatles in Cleveland. And I always heard the story that Norm Wayne and Zingali had been in a meeting in some back room with the Beatles people. And they had told the Beatles brass that they had secured the rights to Municipal Stadium. And the Beatles said, oh, great, okay. And this is when, I think WHK was going to get the Beatles at that point. And as it turned out, WIXY got it because they told the Beatles that they had secured Municipal Stadium when in fact they hadn't. Is that a true story?
You know what? Norm said that they actually had to go to the bank and get a loan. And the loan officer, okay, let me get this right. You want a loan to get Cleveland Stadium? He said, yeah. I said, what are you getting in return? They said, publicity. And they said, you're out of your mind. But they were able to get it. But then all of a sudden, boom, the John Lennon remark, and we've got 80,000 tickets to sell. Yeah, there was some savvy promotion on their part. Yeah.
I just wonder what you guys thought of the state of the music business and the radio business today.
Well, the radio business is a lot different than it was. I mean, there's still top 40, but it's all programmed and all syndicated out of one location. So one guy is making the decision on what songs you hear, like Kiss FM here in Cleveland. But the days of CKLW playing the songs that were popular in Detroit and Cleveland playing the songs that were popular here, those days are gone. And by the way, that's too bad, because Cleveland became the rock and roll capital of the world because we were the first on all the big hits. And the truth of the matter is, if it happened in Cleveland, it happened all around the country. Yeah. So the promotion men from the record companies would pick up on that, and if they got the song played on WIXY, it was a sure thing that that song was going to be a hit. Again, I want to compliment Marge Bush, because she had the ears to pick the right songs that we played.
Yeah, great. Because some of the greatest songs out there to this day are the local and the regional songs that that maybe the rest of the country never got to hear.
Well, we were on Time Won't Let Me first. You guys remember Time Won't Let Me? Yeah. I mean, WIXY was right on that right away. The Cleveland band, and that just went bang.
Yeah. Well, you guys are great tonight. Thanks.
Good. Thank you.
I remember my Wild Child story. Norm Wayne loved to have meetings with the agency out of New York. Would be an ad agency that would come in and be able to write commercials for all of the advertising agencies for us to really promote our company. And so Norm, he did this often, but he said, okay, the three guys are coming in from New York, and I want you guys to meet us at this time. The studio was in Seven Hills. And the way to get to the studio was a long drive, probably 200 yards long. Wild Child had a motorcycle. And so Norm Wayne said, I want every one of you guys to show up in a suit and a tie to show all the people from New York that we're really serious people here. So we did. I'm all dressed up. Lou King Kirby's all dressed up. Everybody's dressed up. Norm Wayne, as the meeting's getting ready to start, said, where's the Wild Child? And nobody knew anything about it. And all of a sudden, here comes a motorcycle driving down those 200 yards with the Wild Child with nothing but a pair of underwear on. And so he gets to the meeting and everybody's laughing. You know, the guys from New York saying, who's this? Well, that's the Wild Child. Now we know why. And Norm Wayne said, why didn't you call and say you were going to be late or were you going to be dressed like that? He said, I didn't have a dime and there was nowhere to put it.
Well, you know, the Wild Child was the victim of a drive-by shooting in Cleveland. He was doing a promotion where he was milking a cow in front of Channel 5.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody came by with a pellet gun. We got it. He said, that's enough of this. But the thing, you know, and everybody said, well, that's not really a drive-by. You get hit with a pellet gun. See if you like it. But that, you know, it was getting dangerous at that point, you know.
I want to say something else about the music, Carl. One of the things that made WIXY great was that we played the best songs no matter what genre it came from. I mean, you could hear from Brenda Lee to Patsy Cline to Dionne Warwick to Aretha Franklin. It didn't matter whether it was R&B or country or what was it? Just Stevens. What was that Stevens guy that did Ahab? Ray Stevens. I mean, it was. We played novelty records. We played everything that we thought, or that Marge Bush knew the Cleveland audience would respond to. So that the music more than the DJs, I think was more.
Wait a minute. Here's a song you might remember. This was one of the craziest songs ever. You got to listen to it on YouTube. You're not going to hear it on radio. The guy actually went on tour. It was by a guy called the legendary Stardust Cowboy, and it was called Paralyzed. And it was just this guy screaming, and he's strumming this, and then all of a sudden you hear Paralyzed, you know. But the thing was, all of a sudden it's on laughing. I'd say, wait a minute, we heard that on WIXY. It was the craziest. And Joe Finan was pushing that, you know. He was pushing that, and Harper Valley PTA. Those are the two.
I want to get to more questions. If we have, can we get one question in before?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, do you have a question over here, Mike? No one? If you have a question, just raise your hand.
You already are over there.
Okay.
Hustle up, Mike.
Hi, what was the most defining moment that made you guys knew that WIXY was like the station in Cleveland and the whole planet? Was there a particular event or a promotion or even like a song?
Yeah, for me it was the WIXY Christmas Parade, where there was 100, as he said, 100, more than 100,000 people down. And I'm in a car, you know, I'm a music guy, I come from a record store. And all of a sudden I'm on WIXY and there's 100,000 people yelling my name. It's like, what?
Well, do you remember that? Well, I think it was one of the final WIXY Christmas parades. They had the Jackson 5 in back of a pickup truck. So Michael Jackson's there with a snowman in back of a pickup truck. Amazing, really.
No, I agree. I agree with both of them. It was the defining moment was the parade, and I mean nobody could do what WIXY did. But I do want to tell one story about.
You mean one more story?
What did the Wild Child do now?
We played 40 records, and they were all 45s, and they were in a row. And this was Marge Bush, the music director. She knew what every record was. And if you took a record out of sequence, she would walk in and say, isn't that supposed to be such and such? Well, I'm really cooking one day. I'm playing the Stones, the Beatles, and when we're on the air like that, you know, you're high as a kite, not on anything but just the music. And so I'm really cooking, and all of a sudden, here my next record is Roberta Flack. The last time I saw your face, or whatever that was. And I said to myself, I'm not playing that. I said, I'm really cooking. And so I skipped Roberta Flack, and I take it off the top, I put it on the bottom, and here comes Marge Bush. She walks in the studio, she said, I have to ask you a question, Larry. Isn't Roberta Flack the next record to be played? And I said, I don't know, I don't think so. She says, take a look on the bottom of your deck. She was that good. I mean, she knew every one of them.
She was a lot kinder to you than me, because she would call up on the hotline, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, you're right.
She worked an 18-hour day.
Any more questions out there before we wrap this up?
Okay, Mike.
Well, this question is for Billy. I'm just wondering if I might get your phone number.
Wait a minute. You want my phone number?
Yeah, I'd like your phone number.
I think everybody knows my number. I don't know why you don't know my number. You know my number. You guys know my number, right? Well, let's sing it to her. 634
Beechwood 45789. All together.
Beechwood 45789. And by the way, you can call me up and have a date any old time.
Welcome to Diamond Days.
On that note, one more, okay. You gotta top that though.
I will.
Okay, wait for the microphone.
You don't need it.
Okay.
Hey, what do you guys get me a WIXY tenor topper?
I know all about it, but do you want me to tell you? Okay, well, maybe the biggest promotion that WIXY, other than the Beatles and the parades and stuff, the time that WIXY was playing top 40 music, none of the advertisers believed that WIXY1260 had any adults listening at all. So Norm Wayne and the sales guys went to a place called Manners Big Boy. And they said, we got this great idea. We're gonna have this little orange ball, a little tenor topper. And what we'd like to do is have you, when people would come into dinner, give them a little tenor topper with a number on it. It had 6 numbers on it. And then WIXY1260, every 12 minutes and 60 seconds, would announce one of those numbers. And then if you had that number, then they would come back to Manners Big Boy and get a free dinner. So now we wanted to find out how successful that promotion was. We knew a lot of people were getting the WIXY tenor topper and going out and having dinner at Manners Big Boy. So Norm Wayne decided one day, let's take 3 helicopters. And he said, and we'll travel around the shopping centers in Greater Cleveland and take pictures of all the cars. That promotion turned out to be one of the biggest we ever did, because now they went to the advertising agencies and almost 100% of the cars in every shopping center had a big orange WIXY tenor topper.
Which is really nuts, right? Because you put the WIXY thing on so you could find your car. Except every car had the WIXY.
Listen, gotta wrap this up, but give it up for these guys because.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
sir.
It's an honor having It's an honor having you guys, and also the audience. You guys are great questions. For anybody who wasn't able to attend, you can let them know. This is recorded as part of the CLE Rocks podcast for Cleveland.com, and we'll upload that episode tomorrow morning via Cleveland.com and get the word out on social so you can listen to this and let anybody know if they weren't able to make it that they can listen to it as well.
I want to say just one thing before I leave. One of the biggest pleasures of my life was to know
one more thing, Larry?
was to know and work with Billy, and to know and work with Mike. And I don't believe that there was anything in my life that had more of an impact than WIXY1260. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you to everybody for coming out. Our next event It's going to be on July 14th, and we're going even further back in radio. From WHK, we have Johnny Holiday, who is flying in from Maryland. He hasn't been to Cleveland, he said, in 20 years. But he's coming in for that night. He's our guest. Michael Chesky will be here as well to keep me straight on the facts. For the further we go back, the little harder it gets for me. So
That was WHK Color Radio. Remember the Color Radio slogan?
yeah, so please, if you like this, come out to that event. Thank you so much. Have a good night, and hope to see you guys next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
WIXY1260 WIXY Radio. WIXY1260 Super Radio. The Super Go-Go In Guys team on WIXY1260 Super Radio.
Who else? WIXY more music could do it.